All right, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to Zoom na Cartografia. Is the broadcast okay? Can you hear me all well?
Yeah, we can hear you. Thank you.
Okay. So, dear colleagues, it's a great pleasure for us to welcome Professor Yoshio Endo, who is our guest today. Professor Yoshio Endo is a graduate school professor at Kanda University of International Studies. He was a visiting scholar at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, in 2005. He received his PhD from University of Geneva in 2006. And the refined version of his PhD thesis was published by John Benjamins in 2007. His current research interest is linguistic variation in the framework of the cartography of synthetic structures, including comparative linguistics, interspeaker variation, dialectical variation, diachronic variation, and autism. Professor Endo will have from 15 minutes to an hour to give his conference, which is entitled Exploring the Cartography Reasons Expressions. After that, we'll have some time for discussion. So please, if you have any questions, just send us in the YouTube's chat or Zoom's chat with your name, country, and institution. Alternatively, you can also send your question by email to tescari@unicamp.br. And now, Professor Endo, welcome to Zoom na Cartografia. Thank you so much for being here with us today, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for a nice introduction from Brazil. Let me share a screen with you. Okay, okay, let's begin. Oops. Okay, in this talk, I would like to explore the cartography of recent expressions. First, let me show you the route map of my talk. I begin with a brief overview of the cartography of syntactic structures. Next, I focus on recent expressions and examine how Rizzi handles recent expressions, why, and then look at Shronsky and Soares' recent phrases. We then look at how their recent P can be decomposed into two types. Then new facts about the characteristics of the newly found recent P will be introduced by looking at Japanese and Italian. There, we look at Cinque's idea that mood expressions can be expressed in parallel between head and specifier through spec-head agreement. There, Adriana Beretti's suggestions are utilized with a topic expression in Italian. Finally, based on the work done with Andrew Rutherford, I will draw a detailed cartography of non-canonical questions, where I will explore the possibility of linking sentence final particles and question words of recent expressions using the device of Fat, Endo, and Hegeman called Concord Marsh. Okay, first I will talk a little about cartography of syntactic structures initiated by Memo Cinque and Rizzi, which is the foundation of this talk by using metaphors. Cartography means map. And the birthplace of this research project is Italy, around here, okay? The goal of this research project is to draw the syntactic structure of a sentence in as much detail as possible. To understand this point, let us look at this word map. Here, if we focus on the right edge around here, we see Japan and Australia. Here we see that Japan is above Australia. This is shown like this. Japan is above Australia. This means that Japan is higher than Australia. In the same way, cartography shows the positional relationship of elements in a sentence. As a concrete example, let's look at the negative elements and WH expressions. The problem here is a positional relationship between the negative element didn't and WH elements such as why and how. And here the WH element why can occur with a negative element didn't, like this. And the such a and the but the as in A, but the other WH element like how here cannot occur with a negative element didn't as in B. So why didn't you fix the bike is okay, but how didn't you fix the bike sounds odd. Many students from China reported the same effect in Chinese when I covered this topic in today's syntax class. So the students from so the Chinese has a same effect. Why is good and how is sounds odd like this. And students from Thailand also reported the same effect in Thai. So this corresponds to this, sounds okay, but this corresponds to this, sounds odd. Where does this difference come from? WH element how is originally lower than the negation, like this, and moves from there to the beginning of the sentence, like this. As has been well known since the work of John Robert Ross, there is a restriction of movement called negative islands, which states that the adverbial WH element, like how, cannot jump over the negative element, like didn't or not. And thus, ungrammaticality occurs when how jumps over the negative element, didn't. Then, why is it possible for another WH element why here to occur with a negative element didn't? As is well known from the work by Luis Rizzi, why occurs originally in a higher position than negation, like this. And therefore, since why does not jump over the negative element, grammaticality arises without violating negative islands. Shronsky and Soare, in their linguistic inquiry paper, shows that why originate in a position of what they call reason phrase or reason P in the CP zone. When I was invited for a talk in Tromsø, Norway, Peter Svenonius pointed out to me that even a WH expression asking for a reason cannot occur with a negative element if it is what for rather than why. So what for? Here the grammaticality is not seen. This sounds out. What aren't you coming to the United States for? Does not sound okay. Based on this fact, I proposed in a collection of papers published by Oxford University Press, I propose that in addition to Shronsky and Soare's reason phrase, which is higher than negation, occupied by why, there is another reason phrase that is lower than the negative elements occupied by what for. To distinguish between these two reason phrases, let us call the reason phrase that is higher in the position than the negative element, reason P1. And then reason phrase that is lower in position than the negation, reason P2, like this. fact 4 is generated in this reason P2 lower than negation, so that when moving to the beginning of the sentence, what jumps over the negative island, so ungrammaticality occurs. Okay. Incidentally, as an Oxford University press reviewer pointed out, why and what for differ in their answer as well. In other words, there are two possible answers to the why question. Here, why is grass green? And the one is an answer using so that caterpillar can play on it. And the other is an answer using because, like this, because God created that way. In this case, the answer using so that means rationale. And on the other hand, answer with because means cause. In other words, there are two types of possible answers to a question with why. Here, a cause answer with because and a rational answer with so that. In contrast, a question with what for, what is grass green for? In this case, cannot be answered with a cause using because, but can only be answered with a rationale using so that. So the what is grass green for? So the caterpillar can play on it. This is okay, but the what is grass green for? Because God created that way. This sounds odd. So that is a question using fact 4 cannot be answered with a cause with because, but can only be answered with a rationale using so that. This fact shows that the difference between reason P1 here and reason P2 is reflected in the difference in meaning between cause and rationale. So the reason P2 is rationale and the reason P1 is cause. And when I later discussed this topic at the international conference in Geneva, Byron Ahn on Princeton, who was then at UCLA, he pointed out the independent fact that for expressing reason mentioned earlier is lower than the negative element even in affirmative sentence. So consider John didn't do it for food versus John didn't eat because of food. In A, John didn't do it because for food. For represents a sense in which the element for here is negated. In other words, for is in the scope of negation. On the other hand, the element because here, which is the answer to why, expresses a sense in which because phrase is negated and not negated. In other words, because is both inside and outside the scope of negation. This fact indicates that the element for occupies a reason P2 position lower than the negation, even in affirmative sentence. And the element because may occupy the position of reason P1, which is higher than the negation, and reason P2, which is lower than the negation, indicating that the reason expression may occupy two reason P positions in the affirmative sentences as well. Last month, I received an interesting question from Beijing, China, about the fact that the expression for can be interpreted outside the scope of negation in this sentence. John didn't do it for love of his country. How should this fact be dealt with? Actually, if I translate this sentence into Japanese, it would be more natural to translate the fourth phrase in this sentence using because. This fact suggests that there are two types of for. The first is a for inside the scope of negation, which belongs to reason P2, and the for that is outside the scope of negation in question can be considered to belong to reason P1. So this sounds like more because, and here propositional content is expressed because he loved his country, like that. And the furthest research would be needed on this point. For example, what about other languages? Next, I would like to talk a little about the new properties of reason P2. That is a property of what of reason, with reference to other languages like Japanese and Italian. Here is an Italian example, and here is a Japanese example. The reason what is present in both Japanese and Italian. And in both languages, what represent cosa in Italian and nani in Japanese, what represent a reason. And since it has the effect of negative island, so non is cannot be present, and nai cannot be present here. Since it has the effect of negative island in both languages, the reason what originally has a lower position than negation in Italian and in Japanese. As will be discussed later, there are only a limited number of languages in which the what of reason exists. For example, the what of reason does not exist in Chinese, although Japanese and Chinese are used in the same Asian region. Now, let's consider where the what of reason originate, the original position. One might think that the what of reason has an invisible for at the lower reason P2 position, like English. However, this idea is suspect in several respects. First of all, if the element of what gets its meaning of reason from the invisible for, then it would be expected that any type of verb would be acceptable. But this is not the case in Italian and Japanese. The what of reason is characterized by the fact that the verb can only be a negative and cannot be an accusative in Italian or Japanese. Here is an example in Japanese, okay? So the unaccusative verb, kita, meaning came, is not acceptable in this what for reason construction. Okay. In addition, the what of reason is appropriate when it expresses a meaning that the subject willingly performs some action as expressed by a negative verb. The most obvious example, clear example, is that the what of reason does not appear with a stative verb like be here in Japanese. But it does appear with a verb try to be here. Therefore, it seems reasonable to think that the element what here, element what, need to get case from the verb in the position of reason P2, which is lower than the negation without the silent element for. Since negative verbs, not accusative, unaccusative verbs, have an external argument, and they can assign an accusative case to the what of reason by Bourdieu's generalization. As a result, the what of reason can be used with a negative verbs without violating the case filter. This point is also made by my 2007 book from John Benjamin's, and most recently by Endo and Wieland to appear in a volume from Peter Lang. Lilian Hegemann notes that the same pattern is also attested in West Flemish, and the same construction exists in modern Greek as well. The above discussion shows that the what of reason in Japanese, Italian, and West Flemish is originally in the domain of a verb phrase. So what is in the domain of a verb phrase, where it receives its case, and there is no invisible for in reason P2 in these languages. Let us next examine where the what of reason moves in the CP zone with a tool used in my 2007 book. So the question is where does what moves in the CP zone? At first glance, one might think that the what of reason would move to a focus position. Here, focus position. Just like the what of object, like what did you buy? So what in the sentence, what did you buy? What can be considered to occupy the focus position? However, there is good reason to believe that the what of reason does not move to the position of focus. First, in contrast to what of reason, in contrast to what which represent a thing, this what of a thing can appear in the focus position of a cleft, but the what of reason cannot appear in the focus position of a cleft sentence. This is a Japanese, and this is a focus position of a cleft sentence. This point is observed by Klaber's recent paper. Second, the recent what does not appear with focus expression such as only or even. Both are out. So what reason what cannot appear with even or only. From this fact, it can be seen that the reason what is not compatible with a focus element only or even, and suggests that the reason what is not in the focus position in the CP zone. Then let's consider exactly where the reason what moves to in the CP zone other than focus. Kono, 2004, says that the reason what in Japanese is most naturally located at the beginning of a sentence. However, the word order between what of reason and other CP element shows that this idea is not correct. First, a topic expression can occur before the what of reason. So the topic expression is found here, and the reason what is found here. For instance, when the subject, in this case, a dog, which is pronounced inu in Japanese, dog, is marked with a topic particle, wa. The reason what occurs behind it. So the topic element can occur in front of the reason what. In contrast, when the subject is marked with a nominative case, ga here, inu ga, and dog nominative. The reason what occurs behind it is does not sound okay. Sounds very unnatural behind the nominative case subject. In contrast, the reason what can occur if it is before the subject with a nominative case like this. From this, we can see that the reason what is below the topic expression, topic in the CP zone, and above the subject position. So there is a hierarchically organized relation here. Rigidity assumes that the reason expression is in the position of interrogative phrase in the CP zone. Then one might think that the reason fact is also moved to interrogative phrase, which is lower than the topic position, and this element may precede fact and is higher than the subject. So the interrogative phrase is between topic phrase and the subject phrase. And the fact of reason moves between this position. Incidentally, one may naturally wonder about the semantic interpretation of fact of reason. In Japanese, in contrast to why, the reason what expresses affective meaning in the main clause. In other words, the speaker who uses a reason what seems to be more interested in expressing surprise or blame than in asking for a reason, asking the hearer for an answer or information. In fact, there are other languages in which elements occurring at the beginning of a sentence express the speaker's affective meaning. Adriana Belletti told me at a conference in Nanzan, Japan, that in Italian, the preposition a added to a topic element expresses the affective meaning, that is a speaker's emotion. And Adriana also suggested at the international conference in Beijing, China, that this phenomena can be explained by saying that the topic element here with the preposition a acquires affective meaning through the operation agree with a speech act projection, which is located higher than this one. The intuition behind this idea is that the element at the beginning of a sentence that represents a speaker's emotion represents a speech act. In fact, the speech act has a property that it cannot be embedded. And indeed, when the what of reason occurs in the embedded sentence, the meaning of speaker's surprise or speech act disappears in Japanese. Then let's examine what kind of speech act the what of reason represent, such as surprise. To examine this point, this construction type here is useful. So let's see the English gloss of Japanese sentence. Here in this English gloss, the reason what sentence occurs in the complement position of a verb of saying. Here, the what reason what sentence occurs in the complement of verb saying. Okay, and the verb of saying is modified by the adverbial expression in a critical tone with surprise in search of an answer, like that. Here, the adverbial expression that modifies the verb of saying is not in the sense of asking for an answer, like in search of an answer. So in this case, this adverbial expression sounds odd. But in the sense of being surprised or reproachful, like in a critical tone or with surprise. From this, we can see that what of the recent sentence expresses speech act of surprise, like surprise or reproach, not with a question. Okay. Based on this fact, I propose that the what of reason is linked to what Hegeman and Hill calls a speech act phrase, which this paper appeared in a volume dedicated for Louise Ritchie's 60th birthday, published in Japan. Okay, so my proposal is the following. Based on this fact, I propose that the what of reason is linked to what Hegeman called speech act phrase. A speech act phrase occurs highest in the CP zone. By doing so, the what of reason receives the meaning of speech act, such as blame or surprise. Here, I would like to follow Belletti Adriana's suggestion and assume that the connection between what of reason and speech act is made by the operation agree. The WH element, which is tied to some special speech act like surprise, is sometimes referred to as non-canonical question or non-standard question these days, because it is primarily concerned with expressing the speaker's emotion rather than demanding an answer from the listener. This is an example of non-canonical question or rhetorical question in a contrastive, this is a Spanish example of a non-canonical question or rhetorical question mentioned in a contrastive study of Spanish and Japanese by a student of mine from Mexico with whom I supervised a master's thesis last year. He said he felt that esque and porque, which correspond to it is and why in English, when these elements occurs together, there seems to be a non-canonical question for a special speech act. This is a kind of a speech act in Spanish. Such a non-canonical question can also be found in the English how come question. This point is discussed in detail in my recent paper in the special issue on non-canonical question of Linguistic Vanguard. This is a journal published in Europe, which I made open access. Let's consider a concrete example. Dylan Tsai, in personal communication with Andrew Simpson, said that, how come question? Expressive surprise. So how come the sky is blue? However, in a personal communication with Andrew Rutherford, he told me that how come question can also be used to express surprise and demand an answer. So A says, I've got to go to the doctor this afternoon. And B says, how come? Oh, the cut of my finger has got infected. So the how come question can also be used to demand an answer and express the speaker's surprise. From this, It seems that how come questions may also occur in speech act when they do not require an answer. Okay, let's skip ahead a little for the sake of time. Look at the cartography of non-canonical question. Okay, let's look at the non-canonical question in terms of cartography. As a first step in drawing a cartography of reason expressions, this cartoon from Peanuts is useful. Here, when Lucy uses a how come question, how come you never send me flowers? Lucy uses this how come question with a come expression and asks for an answer. So he answers, because I don't like you. In this case, nothing follows nothing follows a Q particle, question particle in the Japanese translation. In contrast, when Linus here uses a how come question, how come you never bring me a milkshake? He's very emotional in this cartoon. When Linus uses a how come question that expresses emotion and does not ask for an answer, he's more interested in expressing his anger. And then a particle, in Japanese translation, a particle expressing the speaker's emotion, here, sa, here, follows a question particle in the Japanese translation. From here, we can draw a rudimentary cartography of the non-canonical question. That is, since the speaker's emotion particle follows a question particle and a modal particle with a sense of speaker's inner emotion, we know that the emotion particle is higher than the question particle in a head final language like Japanese. Here, the element to the right of the verb, belongs to a higher hierarchy than the verb. In other words, elements away from the verb are in a higher hierarchy than elements closer to the verb. Okay. In drawing up the cartography of non-canonical question, I use the insight of Memo Cinque's 1999 book. Cinque elucidated that there is a detailed hierarchy in the speaker's mood expressions, where there is a regularity in the occurrence of a particle in the head position of each hierarchy and adverbs in the corresponding specifier. With Cinque's idea in mind, I will explore the cartography of non-canonical question with reason expressions. To explore this point, I will use what Endo and Hegeman call concordance. Here, concord means restrictions between two elements. For instance, temporal clause introduced by scenes like this imposes a restriction on the temporal and a spectral coordinate of the main clause. For instance, let's look at this sentence. I have been living in London since I was a child. In British English, a modification by a temporal since clause, since I was a child, requires a main clause, a perfective aspect, not a simple present tense, and not a progressive aspect. So I live in London since I was a child is not okay in British English. And I am living in London since I was a child. It's not good in British English, okay? Why? Because since clause here imposes restriction to the main clause on, and what should appear here? Since clause requires perfective aspect, not present tense, not progressive aspect. This is a kind of a restriction, which is Endo and Hegeman call concord. In fact, various mood expression at the end of a sentence that occurs in Japanese is differentiated in more detail in non-canonical question with why. To this point, let's look at the following points about Japanese. Japanese people change their character depending on the situation they are in, like teacher, student, clerk, customer, father, child, and so on. And they also change their linguistic expression according to their character. For instance, there are more than 10 different first pronouns in Japanese, depending on the character, as observed by a series of studies by Satoshi Kinsey and Takao Suzuki. To help you get a feeling for this, here is one story I learned from Richard Larson in English. In English, when you play the role of a father, you sometimes use daddy instead of I as a first person pronoun. For example, when a father tells his daughter at the dinner table that he is drunk, in such a situation, instead of saying, "Oh, I am drunk," he can say, the father said to his daughter, "Oh, daddy is drunk." Here, daddy means I am drunk. In Japanese, this is more, so I can be, daddy can be used instead of I, depending on the character. Here, the person is playing the role of daddy. In Japanese, this is more segmented, and the first person pronoun can be varied in various ways to indicate what character or role you are playing, depending on the situation. Here we look at five person pronoun, five first person pronoun: old man, female lady, and a macho person, boy, and a high class lady. For example, if a person, speaker, plays a role or character of an old man, the head position results in the mood expression, jaro, before the question particle, ka. Then, in the subject position, there is another mood expression that the old man used, no, archaic expression. Then, in the subject position, here, the first person pronoun dedicated to the old man, washi, occurs. The expression nani yue here is used by this male of this character when he uses a question asking for a reason. So in this situation, this old man uses old man's mood in the sentence, in the non-canonical question. And he uses old man's first person pronoun. And he uses old man's why. Secondly, when a person plays an adult female role, in the head position, question particle here is preceded by masu, which is a polite expression of mood. Then, on the this Q particle, question particle, is followed by another mood expression, which has a feature empathy. Then, in the subject position, the adult female person's first pronoun, watashi, is used. And another mood expression, ne, and when she asks a reason, interrogative expression asking why is normally used by such a character is naze. And then now, this expression is then translated into English, such as why. As you may have noticed, the why used by these adult women is different from the why used by old men. Therefore, changing an adult woman's why to an old man's why, like this is old man's why, then the sentence sounds strange. This is because the use of the female sentence final particles here imposes a restriction on the use of first person and the why expression. So this female particle requires the female first person pronoun and a female why expression. This connection is made by Endo and Hegeman's Concord merge. Furthermore, if a person plays a macho male like this, character or role, like a manual laborer, in the head position, the mood expression no occurs before the sentence question particle ka, and another mood expression yo occurs behind it, which has a feature minus empathy. Note that the female mood is plus empathy, but that this macho mood has a feature minus empathy. This is a difference. Then the subject is ore. This is a first person pronoun exclusively for men in this character. And interrogative expression that asks why such a character would normally use would be nande here, that occurs at the beginning of a sentence. A literal English version of this expression would be a more colloquial version of why or how come, or something like that. I don't know such an English would exist or not. Again, the old man's why is anomalous here, because the sentence final expression here of this macho character imposes a restriction on the use of the why expression. And this final expression imposes a restriction on the use of the first person pronoun. And then this connection is made by Endo and Hegeman's Concord merge. And if a person plays a boy character in the head position, the mood expression I occurs after the question particle ka. Then in the subject position, the first pronoun, oira, is used. This is a result for a boy character. The interrogative expression that asks for why such a boy character would normally use would be どうして. Literal English version of this expression would be a more colloquial version of why or how come. Here, the women's why is anomalous because the sentence final expressions imposes a restriction on the use of what kind of why should be used here. Namely, the specific boy why and the boy I by concord match. And finally, if a person plays a character of an upper class lady, the head position is occupied by the particle desu. This is a polite mood expression used by the adult women we saw above, before the question particle, here, before the question particle. In addition, another mood expression, shira, occurs behind the question particle. This is dedicated to such a high-class ladies person. Then, in the subject position, the first person pronoun, watakushi, is used. This is a first person pronoun reserved for upper class ladies. And the questioning expression that asks why such an upper class lady character would normally use is naniue. This expression is similar to the archaic expression used by the old man, but it sounds a little more modern, only because the expression corresponding to the preposition for yue ni here is missing. Here, the macho male why sounds anomalous because the sentence final particle of this character imposes a restriction on the use of what type of why should be used here and what type of first person pronoun should be used here by concord match. In summary, the following detailed cartography can be drawn from the 5 characters, like this. Here, the top 5 characters, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 characters, represent each character. Next, the letter in red in the middle are the question word that each character uses to ask why and ask why. So there are 5 why. And the letter in blue at the bottom are the question particle and mood particles, hierarchically organized mood element used by each character. Okay, so there is a hierarchy. This means desu jaro ka is means jaro is higher than ka, and this slash means they are in complementary distribution. So these are links of particle and the why expression and the character. These are linked by Endo and Hegeman's concord merge. Finally, I would like to highlight some of the application areas involved in this kind of cartographic research on sentence final expressions. I am currently participating in a national study of autistic children with medical professionals. Autistic children are characterized by difficulty switching between verbal styles. In particular, autistic children are not good at switching the expression at the end of a sentence, which is presented here, according to the character of the situation. Currently, the mechanism of switching sentence final expressions itself is not well understood. But if the explicit mechanism of switching sentence final expression can be clarified from the viewpoint of cartography introduced here, it would be effective in rehabilitating autistic children and a more accurate diagnosis of autistic children. Thank you for your attention. And these are the references. Thank you.
All right, so thank you so much, Professor, for such an enlightening presentation. So now I'm going to address some of the questions that we have received from the audience. So if you have questions, please, you can still send us through the chat or by email, all right? So the first question is from a student from La Casa, who sent us an email and asked the following question. In English, as you have convincingly shown, reason one, which expresses rationale being realized by so that as an answer to a question is higher than reason two, which expresses cause. Do you have a specialized sentence final particle or morphemes in Japanese which morphologically expresses these two categories? Oh. Can they co-occur in the same sentence?
Yes, this is a very good question. And this is a very nice point because when we use WH expression asking for a reason, we require a special particle, no, that must occur at the end of a sentence. But so when you say, why do you leave? The Japanese sentence is suffixed by the particle no in question sentence. But when we say, when will you leave, or what are you going to eat? Not a why question. That kind of particle can be absent. So there is an exclusively dedicated particle at the end of a sentence that need to be used with the why. And the interesting point is, this is only required in asking a question. So the question is, does this morpheme also appear even in affirmative sentence? The answer is no. So because Japanese is a head final language, because expression occurs at the end of a sentence, and in this case, for some unknown reason, the question particle that must occur with why cannot co-occur with because expression like kara or node. And the interesting thing is that because expression is pronounced like no de, this can be decomposed into two parts, no and de. And as you might have realized, no is exactly the particle that is required for why. Okay, because means no de, and the one part of the morpheme of because part, because, correspond to the particle that licenses why expression. So there is a connection between the affirmative question, affirmative reason clause and WH clause. So that's a very good question. So the answer is yes, in some sense, because can be decomposed into the Q particle, phi particle that is used for the phi question. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor. So, a student from La Casa has read your chapter in 2000 on the 2021 book organized by Soari, that Why book, and asked us permission to ask you something on the position of sentence particle in German. They ask, the very fact that in German the sentence particle occupies a cause medial like position is not a cue to assume that in syntactic derivation it must be assumed as occupying an EP internal position, say meritive mode.
Yeah, that's a very nice point. And the as I mentioned, actually, I wrote this point in my recent paper that appeared in the Linguistic Vanguard, which I made open access. And I showed that the sentence final particles in Japanese correspond to the German sentence medial particles. So the one point that made by the German linguist Marco Cornelio says that the German particles, one of the roles that is played by a German particle like doho or mal or something like that, plays a role of fine-tuning the speech act or the force of the speech act, how powerfully one speech act is expressed. So when we use an imperative sentence like call the police, and in German, perhaps six, Marco Cornelio listed 6 sentence medial particles. And one particle expresses very strong emotions. And the another expresses a very mild emotion. So when we use one particle, it expresses a very strong imperative sentence. And when we use another particle, it makes very weak or mild imperatives. And as you might remember from my talk, there is a sentence final particle that has a feature plus, wait a minute. Not emotional, just a moment. Yeah, empathy. So there is a Japanese particle like ne, which has the feature empathy. And when we use this plus empathy particle in the imperative sentence, the imperative force is very mild, which is used by the high-class lady or something like that. And when we use another particle, yo, which is used by the macho character, this is when we use this in the imperative sentence, the elocutionary force, speech act gets very strong. It makes a very strong imperative sentence. And one thing that should be mentioned in connection with my study on autism, autistic children never uses particle ne, which has a feature plus empathy, because they have a difficulty. They are living in their inner world and do not try to connect with the outside world. So they are very weak in manipulating in the things with other people. So they are not good at using the word involving empathy. So they never use this kind of thing. So this is a very good point. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. So Professor Luigi Rizzi has sent us an email. He says, thank you for the very nice talk. Do you find the same modulation observed with Y with other double H elements in connection with subjects and final particles? If not, this would represent a new kind of specificity of Y. Best.
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. So do you find the same modulation observed with Y with other double H elements in connection with subjects and final particles? If it's not, this would represent a new kind of specificity of Y?
I see. I have never thought about the specificity issues, so I have to think about it. So this is my homework. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your questions. Now, if someone from La Casa and Egg here in the Zoom room want to ask a question to Professor Endo, please open your camera and your microphone.
I will have a question, Jonathan. Thank you so much, but I have just sent you another question by Professor Guglielmo Cinque. So can you please read Guglielmo's question, please? Thank you.
Yes. Here in the chat, right? So do you find the same modulation observed with Y with other double H elements in connection with subjects and final particles? If not, this would...
No, sorry. The question is actually, I got it wrong. I'm so sorry, Jonathan.
Okay,
I will be sending you a zap. Sorry for that. My fault. Now, you got it. Sorry.
Okay. So Professor Guillermo Cinque sent us the following question. Your idea that what of reason below negation receives ACC case from the verb has potentially interesting implication for unnegative verbs, which are sometimes taken to contain a silent cognate object, thus identifying them with transitives. I use English glosses. What are you laughing? A laugh. Now dancing, a dance. Now, transitive verbs are expectedly not so good with the what of reason. For what lack of case? What are you eating these filthy things? And in fact, a negative seems to me equally not so good when the cognate object is overt. What are you dancing this stupid dance?
I see. That's a very interesting point I have never thought about. So please send me these messages. I will send my answer to them and after carefully thinking about that. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, I put the question on the chat, but I will email you. I will be forwarding you Guglielmo Cinque's email. Thank you, Professor Yoshio.
Thank you.
I also have a question. Can I ask?
Sure.
So, okay, very nice talk. Thank you so much. And when the live is finished, please don't leave the room because our NEG and La Casa students want to take a pic with you. So my question is the following. Could you please explain again how the verb, question particle, modal particle order is derived? So can you please explain how it is derived again? I am asking you this question because some of those highest inflectional categories in Cinque's hierarchy expresses moods and modal flavors as well. For instance, speech act, mirrative mood, for instance. So I was wondering, why should we also have these categories somewhat replicated in the left periphery? I mean, the modal category. Should we have an agreement mechanism guaranteeing that, as in Belletti's suggestion for you, or should it be merged in the inflectional domain and move to the left periphery? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for a very nice question. Actually, I made this point in my dissertation and the book from John Benjamin's. My idea is very simple. Modal particles that is proposed by Cinque is reflected in Japanese. So there is a Cinque proposes that there is a hierarchy of modal particles that appears in the IP zone. And the interesting thing about it is that the word order of a particle is a mirror image of the Cinque's hierarchy. So in order to derive this mirror image property, I propose that a snowballing derivation occurs. At the first propositional part, say I run or I kiss Mary or something like that, moves to the spec position of the lowest specifier of the mood particle. And then the whole of the chunk moves up into the specifier of the next higher modal particle. And this goes on like snowballing. So this derives the mirror image of the particle. Japanese, the order of sentence final particle is a mirror image of Cinque's hierarchy. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, Achilles,
Yeah.
please. Thank you so much, Professor Yoshio. You have been very, very clear on your points. It is a direct question because I am really curious. What is the exact difference between inner emotion of surprise expressed by the particle sa in Japanese and counter expectation expressed by the particle no in Japanese?
Yeah, this is a very interesting point. And in my article, I discussed counter expectation particle. So when I counter expectation particle no is suffixed to a sentence that expresses a speaker's emotion or surprise because he or she did not expect that kind of a thing. And what is most interesting about this counter expectation particle is exactly what licenses why. The counter expectation particle is no, NO. This particle is used to license why. So we see the connection between the meaning of why and the counter expectation. I think this makes sense because people ask why because one faces a situation that runs counter to what he expects. So in the affirmative sentence, we can use a counter expectation particle that expresses surprise, and then ask a question. Because he wants to know the reason why. So there is a connection between why and the affirmative counter expectation. They are connected, I think.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Well, I also have a question if we have time. I don't know. Just a clarification question, actually. I was thinking about the derivation of this what of reason, right? So do you think that it's possible to argue that this what of reason might get this affective reading, affective feature already in the Chimpus middle field in mood P position, and then go to speak to act phrase in CP, or not, is already placed in the left periphery?
I see. Yeah. So the question is where the meaning of affective meaning come from. Yeah. My guess is that the affective meaning originates in the speech act phrase found in the highest projection, because this kind of speech act, like surprise, disappears in the embedded clause. Because embedded clause does not have speech act. It is a main clause phenomena. So the because speech act disappears in the embedded clause, which does not have a speech act phrase. So I suspect that the speech act of surprise originate in the speech act phrase itself. It can only appear when in the main clause only.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Professor.
Thank you.
All right, so thank you for the questions. Now, Professor Achilles, would you like to say anything?
Yeah. So thank you very much, Professor Yoshio Endo, for this brilliant talk, very cartographic. It can show us and give us an idea of how cartography can help the synthetic analysis in doing very well with those categories. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it a lot. Thank you.
All right, so Professor Sandra, would you like to say anything?
Yeah. Professor Endo, thank you. Thank you for your excellent lecture. I am very satisfied that you could set time aside for us. Thank you. And it's our pleasure to announce your next guest, Professor Adriana Belletti, whose conference is entitled From Structure Reduction to Enrichment, Theoretical Insights from Acquisition. It will take place on June 16 at the usual time. See you all there. Thank you.
Okay, see you.
See you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For being here with us today, and thank you all who attended the conference. It was a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Bye.